Eli Turner had learned the art of being unseen. It wasn't something he practiced consciously. It simply became part of who he was. At Fairview High, blending into the background was easier than trying to fit in. His clothes, faded, secondhand, and often a size too big, made him invisible. His shoes, with duct tape wrapped across the soles, whispered instead of squeaked. And his silence, perfected over years of being ignored, made him almost ghost-like in the bustling hallways filled with laughter, perfume, and the shrill buzz of locker doors. Every morning, Eli took the same route to school, down the gravel road beside the trailer park, across the railroad tracks, then through the old basketball court where the paint on the hoops had peeled away years ago. He passed the diner where his mother worked the morning shift, catching a glimpse of her through the glass, tired eyes, kind smile, coffee pot in hand. She'd always wave when she saw him, her face lighting up for that brief moment before she returned to pouring refills and balancing trays. Home wasn't much. The trailer they lived in leaned slightly to one side, the floor creaking whenever someone walked too quickly. The walls were lined with photographs that had faded under years of sunlight. Eli as a baby in his mother's arms, his father in an army uniform with a grin that didn't reach his eyes, and a picture of all three of them at a county fair before his father left and never came back. But what the trailer lacked in comfort, Eli made up for in imagination. His small bedroom was cluttered with broken radios, tangled cords, and piles of half-disassembled machines. To anyone else, it looked like chaos. To him, it was a symphony of parts waiting for purpose. He had always been fascinated by how things worked. As a little boy, he used to take apart his toys just to see what made them move or light up. When his mother couldn't afford new ones, he'd try to fix the old ones himself, sometimes successfully, often disastrously. But every failure taught him something. Every spark, every burnout wire was a step closer to understanding. At school, though, that curiosity wasn't something to be proud of. The other kids had their groups, the athletes, the cheerleaders, the gamers, the honor students, and Eli belonged to none of them. His backpack was patched with fabric scraps. His notebooks were filled not with neat notes or doodles of superheroes, but with mechanical sketches, gears, levers, electrical diagrams. When he spoke, his voice carried that quiet hesitance of someone used to being talked over. During lunch, he usually sat alone by the vending machines near the side exit. It was the perfect spot, hidden, quiet, and close to the dumpsters behind the gym. That area was his refuge. After classes ended, he'd slip out there, where no one bothered him, and dig through the discarded remains of student projects or broken school equipment. To others, it was trash. To Eli, it was treasure. He called it the lab. The first time he'd named it, that was almost as a joke. A space behind the gym wall, half covered by a chain-link fence, didn't exactly scream laboratory. But to Eli, the label meant something. It gave the space dignity. It made him feel like he had a world of his own, a world where he didn't have to explain himself to anyone. In the lab, he built little things, a fan made from an old CD and a broken motor, a tiny flashlight powered by a watch battery, a radio that worked for 3 glorious minutes before crackling into silence. The failures didn't matter. What mattered was the thrill of creation, the quiet satisfaction of bringing dead things back to life. Sometimes, when he stayed late enough, the janitor would pass by and shake his head. Still tinkering, "Turner," he'd say with a grin. Eli would just nod and smile faintly. Words were unnecessary. In that dim, flickering light, surrounded by the scent of oil and rust, Eli felt something close to peace. At home, his mother tried to stay positive. One day, she told him over dinner, "You'll build something that'll change your life." He smiled at her faith, though deep down, he wasn't sure. He had big dreams, yes, but dreams didn't pay the bills. They didn't fix the leaky roof or stop the power company from sending overdue notices. Still, when she said it, he believed it, if only for a moment. Everything began to change one cold Monday morning in early spring. The sky was a flat gray, the kind that made everything feel heavier than it should. Eli shuffled into school, rubbing his hands together for warmth, when a loudspeaker crackled overhead. The principal's voice boomed through the hallways. "Attention students. The annual state science fair will be held next month. This is your chance to showcase innovation, creativity, and scientific thinking. Winners will advance to the regional competition. The announcement sent a wave of excitement through the corridors. Students began talking over each other, plans, ideas, team names. For most, the science fair meant recognition, scholarships, maybe even college applications. For Eli, it meant something simpler, a chance to prove that what he built in silence mattered. In his physics class, the teacher, Mrs. Reeves, mentioned it again. "I hope some of you will participate," she said, scanning the room. "It's a great opportunity. Innovation doesn't have to come from expensive tools. It comes from imagination." Eli caught her eye for a brief moment, and she smiled. Mrs. Reeves was one of the few teachers who noticed him, not in a pitying way, but with genuine curiosity. She had once asked to see his notebook after class and was surprised to find detailed sketches of mechanical systems far beyond high school level. "You ever think of joining the robotics club?" she had asked. He'd shrugged. "They wouldn't want me." Now, as the bell rang, he overheard Brandon Keller, the president of the robotics club, boasting to his friends about their new project. "We're building a drone that can deliver packages automatically. My dad's company might even sponsor us." Easy win. Eli's seat was near theirs, and though he tried to stay quiet, Brandon noticed him. "Hey, Turner," he called, smirking. "You entering the fair too? What are you going to build? An engine out of pizza boxes." The group laughed. Eli gave a half smile, pretending it didn't sting. "Maybe I'll surprise you." Brandon grinned wider. "Sure, man. Maybe you'll win best use of garbage." The laughter followed him out the door, echoing in his ears long after class ended. That afternoon, while other kids practiced sports or hung out at the mall, Eli went to the lab. He stood there, hands buried in his hoodie pockets, staring at the pile of junk he'd collected. Wires, soda cans, old toys, pieces of wood. The wind rattled a loose chain on the fence, and for a moment, doubt whispered in his mind. Could someone like him really compete with kids who had access to 3D printers, soldering kits, and expensive software? Could he really build something worth noticing? Then he remembered what Mrs. Reeves had said. Innovation doesn't have to come from expensive tools. He sat down on the cold concrete, pulled out his sketchbook, and began to draw. The idea came slowly at first, then faster, lines turning into shapes, shapes into mechanisms. A robot. Not just any robot, but one made entirely from recycled materials. Something that could move, function, and even think in simple patterns using magnets and solar energy. It sounded crazy. It was crazy. But Eli smiled as he worked, pencil flying across the page. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel invisible. He felt alive. When he finally stopped sketching, his fingers were smudged with graphite. The drawing looked rough, but it held promise, a dream forged from discarded things. He whispered to himself, "Let's see if trash can come to life." That night, he couldn't sleep. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the plan in his mind. Gather parts, study solar mechanics from the library's old books, test magnets, experiment with motion. Each thought fueled him more than any pep talk ever could. By morning, he had a list scribbled on a torn notebook page. Copper wire from old electronics. Small motor from toy cars. Solar panel, salvage from calculator. Plastic joints from broken dolls or tools. Magnet sources, refrigerator doors, speakers. He folded the list into his pocket like it was a map to treasure. At school, the other kids laughed and planned in groups, but Eli's mind was already miles away. When the final bell rang, he bolted straight to the lab. The dumpster lids creaked open one by one as he searched. Old appliances, soda cans, metal scraps. Everything had potential. He filled an old backpack until it bulged. By dusk, his hands were blackened with grease, his hair full of dust. But he didn't care. For the first time, he had a purpose larger than just surviving another school day. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the sky turned the color of rust. Fitting, he thought, for someone who built dreams from scrap metal. He arranged the pieces on the concrete floor, laying them out carefully like bones of some mechanical creature waiting to be reborn. In that fading light, he whispered softly, "This is where it begins." And though no one else could hear him, The lab seemed to hum in agreement. The faint wind carried the smell of rain and metal, and Eli sat there long after dark, sketching, planning, imagining how his creation would move, how it might surprise everyone who'd ever looked down on him. He didn't know it yet, but that single moment, the boy in the dark, surrounded by junk and hope, was the beginning of everything that would come after. The mockery, the failure, the spark, and the applause that would one day echo through the school auditorium. But for now, it was just Eli Turner and his dream made of scraps. The kind of dream only someone invisible could believe in. And as the night deepened, he leaned back against the cold brick wall, eyes half closed, whispering the name that had just come to him, almost like the creation had whispered it first. "Lumo," he said quietly. "You'll be called Lumo." A soft smile crossed his face. Then he picked up his tools and began to build. The story continues in Chapter 2, where Eli's secret project takes shape under the flicker of streetlights, and his teacher discovers the spark of genius behind the boy everyone overlooked. Rain began to fall softly that night as Eli worked behind the gym, his fingers trembling from exhaustion and cold. The droplets tapped on the metal scraps like a quiet metronome, keeping time with his steady movements. He didn't have proper tools, just an old screwdriver, a half-melted glue gun, and a small soldering iron that sometimes sparked and hissed like a tired snake. But to Eli, that sound was a symphony. It was the sound of possibility. He hunched over his workbench, which was really just a piece of plywood balanced on 2 milk crates. Beneath the flickering light of a single street lamp, the first shape of his creation began to emerge. 2 aluminum soda cans formed the legs, supported by old rollerblade wheels he'd found in the trash. The torso came from a dented cookie tin, its surface polished clean enough to reflect a ghostly image of his face. The arms were made from bent coat hangers, the fingers from the remains of a broken toy robot. Every piece of Lumo came from something discarded, something unwanted. In that way, Eli felt connected to it, 2 souls made of forgotten things. He'd stay until the streetlights blinked off, and then he'd sneak home before sunrise, washing his hands in the kitchen sink so his mother wouldn't see the cuts. When she asked why he looked tired, he'd just smile and say, "Studying." She'd kiss his forehead and remind him to sleep, never realizing that her son was trying to bring life to a machine built from trash. Days blurred into weeks. At school, Eli's eyes often drifted toward the clock, counting down until he could return to the lab. His teachers thought he was distracted. His classmates assumed he was lazy. Only Mrs. Reeves noticed something different. She would glance at him during class and see that restless spark, the same kind of hunger she'd once had when she was young and believed ideas could change the world. One afternoon, she caught him staying behind after everyone left. He was quietly gathering discarded experiment materials from the supply closet, old wires, burned-out batteries, a cracked solar cell. "Eli," she said gently, stepping closer, "what are you up to?" He froze for a moment, unsure if he should lie. Then, with a shy smile, he said, "Building something. Something that moves." "Moves?" she echoed. "Like a robot?" "Sort of, but not like the ones you buy. I wanted to run on solar energy, no batteries, no wires. Just light and magnets. And everything made from trash." Her eyebrows lifted. "That's ambitious." He expected her to laugh like the others. Instead, she smiled. "You know, genius often starts with garbage. Just make sure it's safe." He grinned sheepishly. "I think I can handle that." That moment, those few words of encouragement, stayed with him for days. It was the first time someone had looked at him not as a poor kid playing with junk, but as a creator. At night, he poured himself into the work. He scavenged relentlessly, biking to abandoned lots and old recycling bins, searching for anything useful. A broken microwave gave him copper wire. An old lamp became a power circuit. A discarded solar calculator provided the tiny photovoltaic cells that would one day feed Lumo's heart. Sometimes, while working, he talked to the machine as if it could hear him. "You and me, Lumo," he whispered, tightening a bolt. "We're going to show them what waste can do." The more he built, the more he learned. He watched online tutorials on the public library's old computers, scribbling down equations on napkins. He taught himself basic coding from PDF manuals. He learned how magnets could control small motors, how sunlight could trigger movement through stored charge. There were nights when nothing worked. The circuits overheated, the wires burned, and the whole contraption fell apart in a heap. On those nights, Eli sat on the cold pavement, head in his hands, trying not to cry. The rain would soak through his hoodie, the solder would refuse to melt, and doubt would creep in like a whisper. Maybe Brandon was right. Maybe this really is just junk. But every time that voice came, another would follow. The memory of his mother's smile, Mrs. Reeves's quiet faith, and the image of his father's old photo, the one where he stood in uniform with eyes full of pride. Eli would wipe his face, stand up, and start again. And little by little, piece by piece, Lumo began to take form. The first successful motion happened on a Sunday afternoon. The sky was cloudless, the air sharp with early spring chill. Eli connected the last wire, whispered a small prayer, and angled the solar panel toward the light. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the motor hummed. The right arm twitched, just a fraction, but it moved. Eli gasped. "You did it," he whispered. "You actually did it." He laughed then, loud and free, startling a flock of pigeons from the rooftop. It wasn't just a robot that had come alive. It was something inside him, too. From that moment, he poured every ounce of himself into refining Lumo. He adjusted the joints, reinforced the limbs, programmed simple responses, light sensors that allowed Lumo to shift toward brightness, magnetic wheels that gave it motion. The more he built, the more Lumo began to feel like a companion rather than a project. Sometimes, as he worked late into the night, he imagined what it would be like when the world finally saw it. Not just as a boy's toy, but as proof that innovation didn't require money or privilege, only imagination and grit. But while Eli dreamed, others whispered. Brandon and his robotics team had started hearing rumors, how the trash kid was making something big. They'd laugh in the cafeteria, tossing empty soda cans toward the trash bin. "Hey, maybe we should donate that to Turner," one of them would say. "He might need it for his Frankenbot." Eli pretended not to hear, but inside, each joke stung like a cut. Still, he didn't stop. Mockery had a way of fueling him more than praise ever could. One evening, as he worked behind the gym, he heard footsteps. He turned and saw Mrs. Reeves standing there, her hands tucked in her coat pockets. The glow from the street light caught the silver in her hair. "Still at it?" she asked softly. He nodded. "Almost done." She stepped closer, eyes scanning the half-assembled robot. "This is incredible, Eli. You're building this all by yourself?" "Yeah," he said, embarrassed by the pride in her tone. "It's not much, though." She shook her head. "Don't say that. Most people would never even try something like this. You're creating life from waste." He smiled faintly. "That's what I'm calling it. Actually, life from waste. For the fair." Her eyes softened. "That's a beautiful name." She handed him a small box. "Here, I had this lying around at home. It's an old power stabilizer. It might help with your solar circuit." He opened it carefully. "Thank you, Mrs. Reeves." "Don't thank me," she said. "Just promise me one thing. Don't give up, no matter what they say." "I won't." And he didn't. By the time the science fair approached, Lumo stood nearly 2 feet tall. Its eyes were made from small LED bulbs scavenged from a broken keyboard. Its movements were clumsy but full of strange grace, as if it were trying to learn how to be alive. Eli spent hours fine-tuning its balance, adding tiny rubber stoppers to its wheels, and testing it under different light levels. He even sewed a small patch of cloth to its torso, a triangle made from his old hoodie, like a heart. On the night before the competition, he didn't sleep. The excitement and fear tangled inside him like electricity. He replayed every moment in his head, the laughter, the long nights, the tiny sparks that had become something real. When dawn came, he loaded Lumo carefully into a cardboard box, tied it with twine, and took the early bus to school. The sky glowed pale gold, the kind of morning that made even cracked sidewalks look magical. He sat by the window, staring at the clouds, whispering, "We're ready, Lumo. We're ready." When he arrived, the gymnasium was already buzzing. Students were setting up elaborate displays, shiny drones, coded software simulations, sleek poster boards with printed graphics. Eli found a small corner near the back, where he unfolded his tablecloth and gently placed Lumo on top. Kids passed by and snickered. "What's that? A robot made of soda cans?" He ignored them. For once, their voices didn't reach him. He was too focused on the moment, on the small spark of pride burning quietly inside. Then he heard Brandon's voice behind him. "Wow, you actually brought that thing here?" Eli turned. Brandon's robotics team stood there, all wearing matching polo shirts with their club's logo. Their project, a drone with carbon fiber wings, looked like something straight out of Tech Expo. "It's not just a thing," Eli said calmly. "It works." "Oh, I'm sure it does," Brandon said with mock sympathy. "Maybe it'll clean the gym for us after the fair's over." The others laughed. Mrs. Reeves, who had been helping the judges set up, caught sight of the scene. She walked over, her expression cool but firm. "Gentlemen, I suggest you save your laughter for after the results." Brandon smirked but stepped back. Eli exhaled, his hands trembling slightly. Mrs. Reeves leaned in and whispered, "They're just noise." Your signal." That single sentence steadied him. Hours later, when the fair began, Eli stood behind his display as groups of judges made their rounds. He explained how Lumo functioned, how sunlight stored energy through small photovoltaic cells, how magnetic propulsion created motion. Most nodded politely, but a few seemed genuinely intrigued. Still, by the time he finished his demonstration, doubt crept back in. He'd seen the other projects, clean, precise, professional. His looked like a child's experiment. Maybe it wasn't enough. When his turn came to present on stage, his heart thudded so hard it drowned out the noise of the crowd. He took the microphone, staring at the rows of faces, some curious, some mocking, some indifferent. "My project," he began, voice shaking, "is called Life from Waste. It's about how what we throw away can still have purpose. How even discarded things, just like people, can be rebuilt, reborn." He pressed the switch. For a moment, silence. Then a hum. Lumo's LED eyes flickered. Its arms lifted. Slowly, carefully it took its first step. The crowd gasped. Another step, and another. Then, as if sensing the attention, Lumo bowed. The applause that followed was hesitant at first, then thunderous. For the first time, Eli didn't feel invisible. He felt seen. Mrs. Reeves wiped a tear from her eye. Brandon's face had gone pale. And in that electric, trembling moment, Eli realized that maybe genius really could come from garbage. That night, as he packed up his project, Mrs. Reeves placed a hand on his shoulder. "You've done something special, Eli. No matter what happens next, remember this moment." He nodded. But deep down, he knew something was about to change forever. Because this wasn't the end of the story. It was the spark. The next morning, Fairview High felt different. It was subtle, but Eli sensed at the moment he stepped through the front doors. Usually, he moved through the hallways like a ghost. Unnoticed, unspoken to, just another shadow passing under the fluorescent lights. But today, people turned their heads. They didn't whisper cruel jokes or laugh under their breath. They stared. Some with curiosity, some with disbelief, others with something harder to name. Something like reluctant respect. He walked past Brandon and his robotics team near the trophy case. Their laughter cut off mid-sentence. Brandon's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He just watched Eli walk by with that stiff smile people wear when they can't decide if they're angry or embarrassed. For a moment, Eli almost felt sorry for him. Almost. At his locker, a girl from his history class, someone who had never once spoken to him, smiled awkwardly. "Hey, congrats," she said. "That robot thing was actually really cool." "Thanks," Eli replied, his voice smaller than he meant it to be. He wasn't used to this. Attention, kindness, eye contact. It felt strange, fragile, like touching something too bright. Word of his science fair victory had spread faster than he could have imagined. Photos of him standing beside Lumo were already floating around on social media. captioned with things like "From Trash to Triumph" or "The Boy Who Built a Robot from Junk." For a few hours, he was the most talked about kid in Fairview. The quiet boy had built something extraordinary, and everyone was trying to decide what that meant for their neat little social order. By lunchtime, the cafeteria buzzed with it. Eli sat in his usual corner, tray untouched, pretending not to notice the sideways glances. Brandon sat 2 tables away. His team gathered close, whispering fiercely. Eli didn't need to hear the words to know they were about him. Mrs. Reeves found him later that afternoon in her classroom. She was stacking lab equipment, humming softly. "Well," she said, smiling as he entered, "looks like you've become our local celebrity." "I guess," Eli murmured. "It's weird. People keep looking at me." She chuckled. "That's what happens when you do something remarkable. The world notices. Sometimes it's kind, sometimes it isn't, but it's always watching." He hesitated. "Do you think they'll forget soon?" Her expression softened. "They might, but what you made, that won't be forgotten. You turned garbage into something alive, Eli. That's more than a science project. That's a statement." He wanted to believe her. But the praise, though flattering, sat uneasily in his chest. For so long, being invisible had been his armor. Now, everyone could see him, and visibility had weight. It pressed on his shoulders, made every step feel like he was walking uphill. Still, there were small moments that made it worth it. After school, a group of freshmen approached him shyly near the bus stop. "Hey, are you the guy who built the robot?" one of them asked. Eli nodded. "Can you show us how it works?" Another said, eyes wide with curiosity. He smiled, an honest, open smile that felt new on his face. "Sure, maybe this weekend." The boys cheered. It was the first time anyone had looked at him not as the poor kid, not as the quiet one, but as someone to learn from. That night, he went back to the lab. The rain had stopped, and the air smelled of wet earth and cold metal. Lumo sat on the table, still and silent under the faint light. Eli ran a hand over its head, feeling the rough edges of the recycled tin. "You did good, buddy," he whispered. "We both did." He adjusted a few loose wires, cleaned the solar cells, and added a small strip of reflective tape along its back. Half decoration, half armor. It caught the lamplight like a faint heartbeat. Then, for the first time, he let himself dream bigger. What if Lumo wasn't just a school project? What if he could build more machines that helped clean parks, recycle plastic, teach kids about sustainability? What if he could make a difference? He scribbled ideas into his notebook until his fingers cramped. Circuits, mechanical sketches, outlines for something larger. A movement, maybe something that could start small and grow beyond Fairview. He didn't know it yet, but those sketches would later become the foundation for something far bigger than he could imagine. But for now, it was just him and the hum of the night. The next week brought its own kind of storm. Brandon's father, who worked in the local manufacturing industry, had seen the newspaper article about Eli's win. It embarrassed him to see his son lose to a kid who built from trash. So when Brandon came home fuming, saying Eli must have cheated or had help, his father didn't correct him. He nodded, eyes hard, and said, maybe it's time someone reminded him that success is rules. By Wednesday, rumors started spreading. Whispered accusations that Eli had stolen parts, that Mrs. Reeves had done half the work for him, that the robot hadn't actually worked without her help. None of it was true, but truth travels slower than gossip. Eli noticed the change almost immediately. The smiles turned tentative. The congratulations became cautious. In the cafeteria, the same students who had praised him last week now avoided his table again. He tried to brush it off, but it hurt more than the old silence ever had. Being ignored was easier than being doubted. After school, he found Mrs. Reeves cleaning the lab again. She looked up when he entered and frowned at his face. What happened? He shrugged. They're saying I didn't build Lumo myself. Her expression darkened. That's nonsense. Anyone who's watched you work knows the truth. Doesn't matter, he said quietly. People believe what they want. She set down her clipboard. Then you show them again. Build something new. Let your work speak louder than their words. He looked at her, half hopeful, half weary. Do you really think it'll change their minds? She smiled sadly. Maybe not, but it'll change you. And that's what matters. That night, Eli couldn't sleep. He sat at his desk, staring at the newspaper clipping his mother had taped to the fridge. Local teen win science fair with recycled robot. The paper was already curling at the edges. He wanted to feel proud again, but all he felt was a hollow ache. He turned toward Lumo, sitting motionless on his dresser. Its LED eyes blinked faintly, still connected to the small solar panel by the window. He imagined it could see him, understand him even. They don't believe in us anymore, he whispered. But that's okay. We'll make them believe again. Over the next few days, he threw himself into work. Between classes, he sketched designs. After school, he scavenged new materials, small motors, sensors, old computer chips. He began building an upgrade, Lumo 2. This new version wasn't about winning prizes. It was about proving endurance. It would use kinetic energy, storing motion from the environment itself. He wanted to show that progress didn't have to depend on wealth or sponsorships. It could be born from persistence. As he worked, a quiet strength began to replace his self-doubt. He was no longer just reacting to the world around him. He was shaping it piece by piece. Still, the weight of isolation lingered. Some nights, he would look out at the stars above the gym, wondering if being seen had been worth it. Recognition had come with a price he hadn't expected. The pressure, the envy, the loneliness that grew sharper now that he had something to lose. One evening, while he was soldering a new circuit board, he heard footsteps again. This time, it wasn't Mrs. Reeves. Brandon stepped out of the shadows. For a long moment, neither spoke. The air between them was thick with unspoken tension. "Why are you here?" Eli asked quietly. Brandon kicked at a loose bolt on the ground. "You think you're special, don't you? You think winning makes you better than us." Eli set down the soldering iron carefully. "I never said that." "You didn't have to," Brandon snapped. "Everyone's talking about you. My dad's furious. He says you embarrassed me." And him. "That's not my fault," Eli said. "I just built something." Brandon's eyes flashed. "You built nothing. You got lucky. You don't deserve this." Eli felt the anger rise, but swallowed it. "If you really believe that, then build something better." For a second, Brandon looked stunned, as if the idea had never occurred to him. Then he scowled and turned away. "You'll regret crossing me, Turner." When he was gone, the night felt heavier. Eli sat back down, his pulse still pounding. He hated confrontation, but this wasn't about rivalry anymore. It was about pride, and he knew Brandon wouldn't stop until he found a way to tear him down. The next morning proved it. Someone had broken into the storage shed behind the gym, where Eli kept his spare materials. Wires were scattered everywhere, and several key components were missing. Lumo, thankfully, was safe. He had taken it home the night before. But the theft left him shaken. Mrs. Reeves reported it to the principal, who promised to look into it, but Eli knew nothing would come of it. People like Brandon didn't get punished. They got protected. Still, he refused to quit. If they wanted to destroy what he'd built, he'd build again. Stronger. Smarter. He began spending even longer hours in the lab, sometimes until the sky turned gray with dawn. His hands were blistered, his eyes bloodshot, but his determination burned steady. Every click of a screw, every spark of the soldering iron, became a silent vow. "You can't erase me anymore." Weeks passed. Spring turned to summer. The fair was old news, and gossip moved on. But something deeper had taken root. A few students, those who had seen his dedication firsthand, started coming to him for help with their own projects. They called him Professor Trash, half joking, half admiring. And for the first time, Eli didn't mind the nickname. He began tutoring them after school, showing how to build small gadgets from everyday waste. The group grew. Soon, the once empty space behind the gym was full of laughter, clinking tools, and the faint hum of shared creation. One afternoon, Mrs. Reeves visited and saw the little crowd gathered around Eli. Her eyes shone with pride. "Looks like you've started something bigger than you think," she said. He smiled, wiping grease from his fingers. "Maybe, but it's not just me anymore. It's us." And it was true. Fairview High's Forgotten Corner had become a workshop of possibility, born from one boy's stubborn refusal to stay unseen. But change never comes without resistance. In the distance, forces were already gathering, Brandon's bitterness, his father's influence, and a small-town pride that didn't like being challenged by someone from the wrong side of the tracks. Eli didn't know it yet, but the biggest test was still ahead, one that would force him to defend not just his invention, but the very belief that hope could rise from ruin. Summer in Fairview came quietly, the kind of warmth that didn't shout but lingered in the air like a hell breath. The school was half empty now, the hallways echoing with distant chatter from students attending summer classes or clubs. Outside, the sky was heavy with late afternoon light, and the sound of cicadas buzzed softly from the trees. Behind the gym, the lab was alive again, not with loneliness but with laughter. What had once been a hidden corner of rust and concrete was now a small workshop full of energy and ideas. Eli watched as two freshmen, Miguel and Tara, struggled to attach a gear to a small wooden frame. Their hands were clumsy, their faces sweaty and intent. He crouched beside them, guiding their movements gently. No, see, if you force it, it'll break. You have to listen to the material. Feel where it wants to go. Miguel frowned. You talk like the stuff's alive. Eli smiled faintly. In a way, it is. Everything has potential. You just have to see it. It was strange. He'd never been the kind of person to talk much, but now the words came easily. Teaching was different from speaking. It was like passing on a secret language only a few people care to learn. The small group of students who gathered around him after school weren't the popular ones or the wealthy ones. They were kids who liked to build, to tinker, to imagine. Some were shy, some rebellious, all of them drawn to this unlikely space where creativity didn't depend on money or permission. They built small things at first, tiny wind turbines from bottle caps, lamps from discarded batteries, toy cars powered by magnets. Every success was met with cheers and high fives. Every failure became a lesson. Mrs. Reeves sometimes stopped by after grading papers, leaning against the doorway with quiet pride in her eyes. You've built more than machines, Eli, she said once. You've built a community. He had. And for a while, it felt like everything was finally falling into place. But in a small town, change is never welcomed easily. Rumors spread, twisted by envy and fear. Parents began asking questions. Why were their kids spending so much time behind the gym? Was it safe? Was it even allowed? Brandon's father, Mr. Keller, had been particularly vocal. That boy's turning the schoolyard into a junkyard, he complained at a PTA meeting. And now our kids think they can build robots out of trash instead of studying real science. Mrs. Reeves defended Eli fiercely. He's teaching them resourcefulness, creativity. Isn't that what education should be? But Keller wasn't satisfied. He'd lost face after his son's defeat, and pride has a long memory. He began calling in favors, city inspectors, district board members, anyone who would listen. He wanted the program shut down. Eli didn't know any of this yet. He was too busy working on Lumo's upgrade. The robot stood taller now, sleeker, its movements smoother. He'd integrated new sensors and a small memory chip salvaged from an old phone. Lumo could now respond to touch, light, and even simple voice commands. When the kids clapped, or spoke its name, it turned its head toward them. The first time it happened, the entire group fell silent. Then Tara gasped. It looked at me. Eli grinned, pride blooming in his chest. Say its name again. Lumo. The robot's LED eyes blinked twice and tilted its head, as if acknowledging her. The group erupted in excitement, laughter echoing off the gym walls. For a moment, the world felt brighter than the late summer sun. But while Eli's little workshop thrived, the storm outside was gathering strength. One Friday afternoon, as they were packing up, the principal showed up with two men in suits. His smile was tight, his tone colder than usual. Eli, can we have a word? Eli wiped his hands on his hoodie. Sure, sir. The men introduced themselves as district safety inspectors. They asked to see the space, to examine the wiring, the tools, the storage of materials. Their eyes lingered on the scattered wires and soldering irons with a kind of polite disapproval. This isn't an authorized club, one of them said, and these materials could be a fire hazard. Mrs. Reeves arrived mid-conversation, her expression darkening. "These students are supervised," she said firmly. "Everything here is safe. I oversee their work myself." The man gave her a hurt smile. "We understand your good intentions, ma'am, but liability is a concern. The district can't allow unsanctioned projects on school property." Eli felt something cold settle in his stomach. "You mean we have to stop?" "I'm afraid so," the inspector said. Effective immediately. The words hit harder than he expected. Around him, the kids went quiet. Miguel kicked the dirt. Tara looked like she was about to cry. Mrs. Reeves argued, pleaded even, but it was useless. The men left with polite goodbyes and the promise of further review. When they were gone, silence filled the space. Eli stared at the workbench where Lumo sat, motionless and gleaming in the last rays of sunlight. For the first time since the fair, he felt that old sense of invisibility creeping back. "We'll figure something out," Mrs. Reeves said gently, putting a hand on his shoulder. "This isn't the end," but it felt like it. That night, he stayed long after everyone left. He sat beside Lumo, the soft glow of its eyes the only light in the dark. "They don't understand," he whispered. "They see junk. They see risk. But I see life." The robot blinked, its servos whirring softly, as if listening. "I'm not giving up," Eli said, his voice low but certain. "Not again." The next day, he moved everything out of the school grounds. The kids helped, carrying boxes of parts, tools, and half-finished gadgets to an abandoned warehouse near the old railway line. It was dusty and cold, but it was theirs. They swept the floors, set up tables, and hung string lights for warmth. The new lab felt like rebellion, and maybe it was. They called it the workshop. Here, Eli taught them even more: how to program simple sensors, how to repurpose car batteries into generators, how to make motors spin using nothing but static charge. The sound of creation filled the space again, louder, freer, defiant. They filmed their projects, posting short clips online under the name Junkyard Genius. The first few videos barely got views, but one night, something strange happened. A popular science YouTuber stumbled upon their video, Lumo blinking and walking under the banner made from waste. Within days, the views skyrocketed. Thousands of comments poured in from around the world. "This is amazing. A robot made from recycled junk? Incredible. That kid's going places. This is what education should look like." Eli was stunned. In just a week, the video hit 100,000 views. Local reporters called. News vans showed up outside the school, and the same people who'd once doubted him were now asking for interviews. For a moment, he let himself enjoy it. The recognition, the validation. He wasn't invisible anymore. He was someone. But fame has a way of bending truth. When the story reached the local paper again, the headline read, "Junkyard Robotics Raises Safety Concerns." The article quoted anonymous sources accusing Eli of breaking into school property, using unsafe materials, and endangering other students. The source, though unnamed, was obvious. Brandon's father had struck again. The district board reopened the investigation. This time, they weren't asking questions. They were issuing warnings. Mrs. Reeves was called into meetings. Parents began pulling their kids from the club. Within a week, the workshop was nearly empty. Eli tried to stay calm, but anger and fear twisted inside him. He'd built something beautiful from nothing, and now it was slipping away again, stolen not by failure, but by lies. He met Mrs. Reeves in her classroom after one of her meetings. She looked exhausted. "They're threatening to suspend you," she said quietly. He blinked. "What? Why?" "They're saying you used school resources without authorization, that you violated district policy." "I was helping kids learn," he said, voice shaking. "How is that a crime?" She sighed. "It's not. But politics don't care about fairness." He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw something new in his eyes. Not despair, but defiance. "Then I'll fight," he said. "Not with words, with work. I'll show them what this really means." That night, he and the few remaining students stayed in the workshop until dawn. They built tirelessly, faster than ever before, channeling their frustration into motion. They wanted to prove that creativity couldn't be shut down, that even under pressure, innovation would find a way. By sunrise, they unveiled Lumo 3, a more advanced version with reinforced joints, a compact power core, and simple voice recognition. When they tested it, it responded not only to sound but to tone. It could distinguish calm from anger, joy from sadness. When Eli softly said, "Lumo, look at me," the robot turned and blinked twice. When he said, "Lumo, it's over," the robot bowed its head. The kids clapped and cheered, tears in their eyes. In that moment, every doubt, every insult, every setback felt small. But the celebration didn't last. 2 nights later, a storm hit the town. Wind howled through the streets, rain drumming against rooftops. Eli was asleep when his phone buzzed with a message from Miguel. "Eli, the workshop's flooded. You need to come." He ran out into the rain, barefoot, the cold cutting through his clothes. When he reached the warehouse, his heart broke. Water poured through a shattered window. Tables were overturned, wires sparking in the dark. Lumo lay on its side, half submerged, its lights flickering faintly. "No," Eli whispered, wading through the water. He lifted the robot into his arms, pressing it to his chest like a wounded friend. "Stay with me, Lumo. Please." But the circuits hissed, and the light faded. The others arrived minutes later, soaked and breathless. No one spoke. They stood in silence as Eli sat on the floor, holding what was left of his dream. Mrs. Reeves arrived later, her umbrella useless in the wind. She knelt beside him. "Eli, it's gone," she said softly. He shook his head. "No, not yet." Even through the tears, he refused to give up. He'd rebuild again. He always did. But this time, something was different. This wasn't just about a machine anymore. It was about everything it stood for. As dawn broke, painting the wet streets gold, Eli looked out at the ruins of the workshop and whispered, "They can take everything, but they can't take the spark." Mrs. Reeves placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then make it shine brighter." He nodded slowly. "I will." He didn't know how or when, but somewhere deep inside, he knew this wasn't the end. It was only the storm before the sunrise. The rain had stopped by the time Eli stepped out of the warehouse, but the smell of wet metal clung to the air, sharp and bitter. The sunrise filtered through the broken window panes, painting streaks of light across the water-stained floor. Everything inside lay ruined. His notebooks soaked through, tools rusted, wires tangled like veins that had been ripped from a heart. Lumo's shell, once gleaming with hope, now reflected the pale gray of defeat. But beneath all that wreckage, something inside Eli refused to die. He stood there for a long time, hands trembling, heart heavy but unbroken. Around him, the few remaining members of the group began picking through the mess, silently gathering what could be saved. Tara found one of the LED eyes from Lumo and held it out to him like an offering. "It still works," she whispered. Eli took it gently, turning it over in his hand. The light flickered once, faintly, as if the robot was winking at him. He smiled through the ache in his chest. "Then we start again," he said quietly. Mrs. Reeves came later that morning, her shoes soaked, her hair sticking to her face. She looked around at the destruction, then at Eli, who was already sorting wires into neat piles. "You don't rest, do you?" she said softly. He didn't look up. "If I stop now, it's really over." She sighed, stepping closer. "You can rebuild, but you need help this time. You can't carry this alone." Eli finally met her gaze. There was exhaustion in his eyes, but also something fierce, unyielding. "I've carried worse," he said simply. And so he did. The next few weeks blurred into a rhythm of salvage and repair. The workshop was gone, but Eli turned the ruins into a new kind of lab. Leaner, smarter, more efficient. He used what little money he had saved from odd jobs at the hardware store to buy basic tools. The rest he found in scrapyards, donation bins, and forgotten corners of town. The kids who had once followed him slowly returned, one by one, drawn back by the quiet determination that radiated from him like gravity. They rebuilt together. The process wasn't easy. There were nights when Eli fell asleep on the cold floor, soldering iron still in his hand, only to wake up at dawn and keep going. Mrs. Reeves brought sandwiches and coffee, sometimes sitting beside him as he worked in silence. She didn't ask questions. She just watched, understanding that what he was building wasn't just a machine, it was redemption. One afternoon, as the sunlight poured through the cracked roof, Eli stood up from the workbench, grease streaking his cheek, and said, "We need to think bigger." Miguel looked up from the circuit board he was tinkering with. "Bigger how?" Eli smiled faintly. "Not just rebuilding Lumo. Rebuilding the idea. What if we made something that could actually help people? Something practical. A robot that cleans rivers or sorts waste automatically." Tara's eyes widened. "You mean like environmental robots?" "Exactly," Eli said. "If we can show that what we do isn't just creativity, but a solution, they'll have to listen." Mrs. Reeves nodded from her corner. "That's the spirit. Innovation through necessity." And just like that, a new dream began to form. They called the project reclaimers, machines that could gather recyclable waste and separate it by type using basic sensors. It was ambitious, far beyond anything they'd tried before, but Eli had learned long ago that ambition was just another word for stubborn hope. He started drawing new designs in his notebook, his pencil flying across the page. His movements were faster, more confident now. The pain of losing Lumo had become fuel. The group worked after school, sometimes until late at night, building prototypes from whatever they could find. Motors from old fans, sensors from calculators, frames from metal shelves. They transformed trash into purpose, chaos into pattern. Weeks turned into months. The project grew. So did its reach. Local teachers began asking questions. Some even donated supplies. A journalist from a regional paper visited, this time writing a story that wasn't about scandal or safety concerns, but about resilience. The headline read, "From Junk to Justice. Teen Engineer Rebuilds Hope After Destruction." The article spread online, and with it came unexpected attention. Emails started arriving from universities, NGOs, even environmental groups. One of them, a professor named Dr. Alan Pierce from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, left a message that made Eli freeze when he read it. "Eli, I saw your work on the Reclaimers project. What you're doing is extraordinary. I'd like to sponsor your team to attend the National Innovation Summit in Chicago next month. Let's talk." He read it 3 times before believing it was real. When he finally showed Mrs. Reeves, she laughed out loud, tears in her eyes. "Eli, this is huge. Do you understand what this means?" He shook his head slowly, still dazed. "It means we're going to Chicago?" She nodded. "It means you're going to be heard." The following weeks felt like a dream. The group worked nonstop, fine-tuning their prototype. They built 3 small reclaimers, each designed to identify metal, glass, and plastic using sensors made from repurposed components. They ran test after test, often failing, but always learning. On the night before the trip, Eli stood alone in the warehouse, staring at the machines lined up before him. Each one had a hand-painted label: Hope, Unity, and Echo. The names came from the kids. He placed his hand on each one, whispering softly, "You're more than machines. You're proof." The trip to Chicago was long, but filled with excitement. None of them had ever been out of the state before. They rode the bus overnight, the city lights growing brighter as dawn approached. When they finally arrived at the convention hall, Eli's heart nearly stopped. Everywhere he looked were teams with advanced equipment, banners, and sponsors. Robots polished to perfection, displays glowing with digital precision. Their little table of recycled machines looked like a relic from another world. Miguel shifted nervously. "We don't belong here." Eli looked at him, then at the others. "Maybe not," he said quietly, "but we're still here." When it was their turn to present, he stepped forward. His voice shook at first, but steadied with every word. He talked about Fairview, about the lab, about losing everything and starting again. He spoke of sustainability, community, and hope, the idea that waste was just potential waiting for purpose. When he finished, the room was silent. Then, slowly, applause began, soft at first, then swelling until it filled the hall. Afterward, Dr. Pierce approached him, his expression warm. "Eli, you reminded everyone what innovation really means. It's not about money or polish, it's about heart. They didn't win first place that day, but they didn't need to. They won something more powerful: validation. Universities began offering scholarships. Companies reached out for collaborations. And for the first time, Eli realized that his dream could live beyond Fairview. Back home, the town that had once doubted him now welcomed him like a hero. The mayor gave him a small plaque of recognition. The school reinstated the club, and even Brandon nodded at him in the hallway. Not with mockery, but with reluctant respect. Yet beneath all the praise, Eli felt a strange kind of quiet. Standing behind the gym one evening, he looked out at the sunset, the sky painted gold and crimson. Lumo's old LED I hung from a chain around his neck like a talisman, glinting softly. Mrs. Reeves joined him, smiling. "You did it, Eli." He shook his head. "No, we did it." She laughed softly. "So what now?" He looked down at the pendant, feeling its faint pulse of reflected light. "Now," he said slowly, "we go further. There are bigger problems out there than just one town's trash. If we can build something from nothing here, maybe we can do it anywhere." Her eyes shone. "Then you'd better start planning." He smiled, and for the first time in years, the future didn't feel like a faraway dream. It felt close, tangible, electric, the kind of future that hummed like a machine just before it came to life. That night, as the stars rose over Fairview, Eli sat by his workbench once more. The warehouse still bore scars from the storm, but he no longer saw ruin, only raw material. He began sketching again, new lines, new designs. Drones that could plant trees. Robots that could rebuild homes after disasters. Machines born from imagination and persistence, carrying the promise of a cleaner, kinder world. He didn't notice the hours pass. Outside, the streetlights flickered, and a warm breeze rustled through the open window. He paused, looked at Lumo's old eye on the table beside him, and smiled. "Let's build again," he whispered. And somewhere in the silence, it almost felt like the little LED blinked back. The hum of creation began once more. The first email that felt like a door opening to another life arrived at 3:12 a.m. when the warehouse was quiet enough for Eli to hear the tired creak of the rafters and the soft whir of a box fan he'd rescued from a curb. He'd been sketching a drone that could plant seeds and burn scars left by wildfires. Another page in a notebook crowded with stubborn hope when his laptop chimed. The subject line read, "Global Sustainability Consortium Partnership Proposal." He stared at it for a long time before clicking. Words like resources, manufacturing scale, and worldwide distribution flashed back at him. Numbers so large they felt like skylines followed, along with a clause about exclusive intellectual property transfer. He closed the lid and rubbed his eyes. Outside, a train's lonely horn drifted across the tracks, then faded into the night. By morning, there were more messages. A tech conglomerate offered a campus, equipment, and a team if he relocated and licensed his designs. An oil and plastics giant wanted a public sustainability initiative with photos of Eli standing in a field of restored wetlands, funded by the very company whose products washed up in those same wetlands. A venture fund wanted to put him on television, a boy wonder who could make waste sing. Mrs. Reeves found him reading with a distant look, the kind people where when a plane has dipped suddenly and the stomach hasn't caught up. "This is what you wanted, isn't it?" she asked gently. "For them to listen." He nodded. "I wanted them to listen to the work." She sat beside him on the workbench and followed his gaze to the prototypes. Hope, Unity, Echo lined up like small, earnest soldiers. "Then listen to the work first," she said. "It'll tell you how to be heard." Days unspooled into meetings, calls, and offers that smelled like fresh paint and hidden mold. Dr. Pierce called from Cambridge. "Trust your North Star," he said. "Scale is a tool, not a destiny. If they want your vision, they'll protect your vision." Eli started carrying a little index card in his pocket. On one side, he wrote, "What problem am I solving?" On the other, "Who gains if I'm wrong?" Each time he sat down with a polished team in a polished office, he would feel the edge of that card and breathe. Sometimes he had to say no. Sometimes yes. Mostly, He said, "Not like that," and watched smiles tighten. Fairview changed around him. The district reversed its position, then overcorrected. They gave the workshop official status, a small budget, and a key that opened something larger than a room. It opened permission. The kids came back in waves. Miguel learned to lead, calm and steady. Tara, fierce and precise, coded nights without complaint. They wore dust and pride like uniforms. Brandon hovered at the threshold one afternoon, hands in pockets, eyes on the concrete. "I heard you needed volunteers for the river pilot," he muttered, as if the words weighed more than they should. Eli wiped grease on his sleeve and held out a set of gloves. "We need all the hands." Brandon took them like a truce flag he wasn't sure how to fly. The river arrived like a truth. In late September, when the heat pulled back and the cottonwoods whispered their first yellow, the workshop wheeled their newest prototype, Harbor, down to the boat ramp. It looked like a cross between a beetle and a skiff. Light chassis from old bike frames, a shallow belly, a sifting mouth that could distinguish plastic from reeds, aluminum from stone by the tune each thing sang when the current tapped it. "You ready?" Tara asked, one palm on the hull. "I've been ready since 5th grade." Miguel grinned, shoving off. Eli walked the bank with the remote he'd built, but mostly watched. Machines could be taught to learn. People needed proof. The proof slid forward on dark water that had carried bottles and branches and boys skipping class. Harbor paused, adjusted, and set to work. Crowds gathered on the bridge. Parents, fishermen, a few reporters, a girl with a cardboard sign that said tomorrow belongs to the patient. The mayor appeared with a smile that tried to hug every camera at once. "This is what happens," he declared, "when innovation meets community." People nodded. Some cried quietly. A little boy on the rail pointed and yelled, "Robot fish." The sun laid a coin of light where the current bent. Eli felt the same quiet rise inside him that had come the first time Lumo twitched. Not a trumpet blast, not a victory chant, just the rightness of a thing doing what it was meant to do. By evening, Harbor had sorted 45 pounds of plastic and metal onto the bank in tidy piles. They weighed it, logged it, and bagged it for the recycler who had promised a fair rate. The story traveled that night. Local, then regional, then national. A clip of Brandon and Miguel high-fiving beneath the bridge did numbers on a platform Eli never used. At the warehouse, they ate pizza on upside-down buckets, oil soaking through napkins, laughter loud enough to shake dust from the ceiling. Mrs. Reeves, with a soda she never finished, lifted it like a toast. "To Harbor," she said, and to stubbornness. They clinked paper cups. For an hour, they forgot deadlines and clauses. Then came a knock. It was late, the warehouse in shadows, the fan's breath carrying the smell of solder and pepperoni. A man in a flawless suit stood at the threshold with a woman in a blazer the color of cool water. Their smiles weren't sharp, exactly. They were the middle distance of smiles, practiced, careful. The man introduced himself, Evan Price, Strategic Partnerships, Vestal Dynamics. The woman, Kara, did not give a last name. "We've admired your journey," Evan began, selecting the word like a surgeon selects a scalpel. "We're in a unique position to scale your vision while insulating you from administrative burdens. You're an artist. Let's be the frame." Eli waited. He knew the rhythm now. Compliments, runway, then the curtain. Kara slid a folder across the table. Numbers, renderings, a campus near the coast with glass that wanted to be sky. And in the middle, a clause like a hook, transfer of patents, internal review for all public statements, non-disparagement in perpetuity. She spoke with velvet precision. "You'll be free to invent. We'll manage the rest." He thought of the river. He thought of the car in his pocket. "Who gains if I'm wrong?" "Why the gag?" he asked, tapping the clause. "It's standard," Evan said. "At your scale, messaging is impact. Control," Eli said. "Impact," Evan repeated, like someone correcting a child's pronunciation. "This way, you won't be sidelined by politics." He remembered district boardrooms, safety inspectors with rehearsed smiles, Brandon's father in a pressed shirt that tried to make a point. He remembered the storm, the water finding every weakness. Messaging is impact. He looked up. "And if your profits conflict with our mission?" Kara's smile did not move. We don't anticipate conflicts. That isn't what I asked. Silence ticked between them. Somewhere a mouse scurried and a string light blinked, undecided. Finally, Evan closed the folder and stood. Think on it, he said, the gentleness, almost a kindness. You're ambitious, Mr. Turner. You'll need the world to go where you're going. He offered a card. Eli didn't take it. The world is already here, he said, motioning toward the kids, the tables, the prototypes, the door the river used. Evan nodded once, polite as a last handshake. Ambition, he said, or geography. They left, and the night exhaled. He didn't sleep. He walked to the bridge and listened to the river telling its endless story, a story about gravity and persistence and the long memory of water. He pictured Lumo's LED eye, cool against his palm, the faint glimmer that had outlived a flood. He pictured his mother's tired hands setting a coffee pot on a burner that rattled, the way she always asked, "Did you eat?" As if nourishment could be a prayer that kept a boy standing. He pictured a younger version of himself behind the gym, alone but not lonely, whispering names to a machine that wasn't finished yet. When the sun came, thin and shy, he had his answer, though it didn't feel like a decision so much as a return. He wrote a letter. He turned down Vestal Dynamics. He turned down 2 more offers with clauses that asked him to disassemble the very spine that held this thing upright. He said yes to a scrappy nonprofit with no marketing department and a lawyer who wore the same tie 3 days in a row but had eyes that kept their promises. He said yes to a university partnership with Dr. Pierce that kept the patents in a communal trust. He said yes to a municipal pilot in 3 river towns with budgets that squeaked. He said yes to a schedule that gave him Sundays with his mother, who had started leaving the diner early on those days without telling her boss, which was a small rebellion she wore like lipstick. It wasn't glamorous. It was good. The workshop sprouted branches, a borrowed room in a church basement, a rail car donated by a man who wanted to be remembered for something besides his father's name. A classroom in a reservation school where a girl who welded better than most men Eli had met taught him a trick that made a joint hold when the metal had stories. They crated Harbor's brood, cedar, finch, marigold, and sent them out with instructions written like recipes your grandmother trusts you to adjust. Photographs returned. Kids with gloves too big standing in proud rows behind piles of sorted waste. Elders with their arms crossed above smiles that refused apology. A bridge no one had painted in years, sprouting a banner that read, "We return what we borrow." Some losses still came. A unit snapped its belt because someone had tightened it with anger. A councilman cut funding because innovation hadn't knocked on his door first. A boy quit the program when his uncle said real men didn't play with trash. Grief lived in the corners, patient. And still, hope worked the day shift and the night shift. One afternoon in winter, when the river wore ice like lace and the sun looked tired early, Brandon lingered after their session. He had learned to solder clean and speak cleaner. "My dad asked about you," he said, not quite meeting Eli's eyes. "He thinks you made him look small." Eli waited. "I told him you made me look small once," Brandon said, a half smile that understood old weather. "And then I learned that small is a place you grow from." They stood with their backs against the concrete wall that kept the hill from remembering it used to be a hillside. "He'll come around," Eli said. "Or not." Brandon nodded. "Either way," he said, "I'm here." They bumped shoulders, an accidental ritual. Spring brought a letter with a seal that meant a stage, a microphone, 1,000 eyes. The National Youth Laureates in Engineering had selected Eli to speak. He wanted to say no. The river didn't stop for ceremonies. Mrs. Reeves, who had started leaving little reminders on post, "It's that red drink water," breathed on the edge of his workspace, threatened to register him herself. He wrote a speech at the kitchen table where he had once eaten a sandwich he pretended was enough. He threw it away. He wrote another on the back of invoices, interrupted by phone calls about bearings and bus schedules. He threw that one away, too. Finally, the night before his flight, he slid his notebook across the wood and wrote simply, "Tell the truth." The stage looked like a promise made of light. He stood beneath it in a jacket his mother had ironed twice and told a room of important people the least important details, that he had learned to listen not to machines but to materials, not to markets, but to kids who wanted to touch their future with both hands, that had failed often and publicly and survived by building again the next morning. That genius was often just a bruise that didn't ask to be kissed, that the word trash had been used on objects and people, and that both deserved better, that the world called it garbage. I called it a beginning. He didn't cry. Other people did. He left the stage dizzy, and in the green room, he found a hand on his shoulder. His mother, in a dress she'd found at a thrift store and tailored to her smile, pressed her forehead to his. "You sounded like your own father for a second," she said. The part of him that wanted to build bridges instead of crossing them alone. He swallowed and let himself be held. On the flight home, as the land stitched itself into roads and fields below, Eli drew a new design. Not a machine, a place. He sketched a center with doors on every side. One for kids who didn't know what a torque wrench felt like yet. One for elders who had fixed the same mower for 20 years without charging their neighbor. One for people who didn't have papers but had skills. One for the ones who left school before the clock said they could. One for the ones who had been told to sit down so many times they had forgotten how to stand. A place with a river out back and a kitchen that believed in soup. He wrote at the top, "The Foundry." When he landed, he sent the drawing to Dr. Pierce with a single line. "Help me make a home for this work." The reply came an hour later. Yes, they broke ground in a lot that used to sell cars that didn't last. Volunteers brought shovels, and someone brought a speaker that played old Motown until the battery died, and nobody minded. A crew from the reservation came with a welder who winked at Eli over her mask and ran a bead so clean you could comb your hair in it. They built with reclaimed brick, with windows from a shuttered library, with a door from a nightclub that had once taught the town how to dance. When the foundry opened, the mayor cut a ribbon, and a kid whose name the mayor didn't know cut a zip tie on a toolbox, and the second cut meant more. If you entered on a Tuesday in June, you might find Harbor's descendants lined up for maintenance and a girl's setting type in the print corner. Letters that made words that made laws softer. You might find Brandon teaching a boy to lay a wiring harness where it won't chafe, and Miguel hand lettering, "In no shame in asking questions," above the work sinks. You might see Tara at a whiteboard mapping an algorithm that treats a forest like a choir instead of spreadsheet, pausing only to sip coffee that someone made strong enough to explain the day. You might find Mrs. Reeves leaning in a doorway, her retirement papers unsigned, her eyes taking attendance the way gardeners count blooms. And if you followed the hum to the back, you'd find Eli at a table no larger than the one behind the gym, sandpaper in one hand, patience in the other, listening to a motor that wanted to be better. Not all stories end with fireworks. Most end with someone turning off the lights and checking the lock twice and whispering thank you to no one in particular. But some evenings pull a thread you feel in your ribs forever. On a late summer night, the town held a potluck on the riverbank to celebrate 1 year of Harbor's work. Children ran between tables, strangers traded recipes, and the bridge hummed with feet. Someone had strung paper lanterns, and their reflections made the river look like it remembered stars. At the edge of the crowd, an older man in a worn army jacket watched with a guarded face. He stepped forward slowly, took off his cap, and held it in 2 hands. "You the Turner boy?" he asked, voice gravel, finding its road. Eli turned. The man's eyes were the same shape as the eyes in an old photo that had never smiled right. His mother's breath caught behind him like a door not ready to close. "I'm sorry," the man said, words like nails pried from old wood. He did not offer explanations. He did not ask for credit. He asked, simply, "Do you need a hand?" Eli looked at his hands, scarred, capable, empty. He looked at his mother. She nodded once, a kingdom passing a law. He held out a wrench. "There's always room," he said. They worked in companionable quiet, 2 silhouettes mending a winch while the river told them it knew how to carry and forgive at the same time. When the music softened and the speeches ended, Tara nudged Eli toward a small table draped in canvas. "Open it," she said, practically vibrating. He folded the cloth back. On the table lay Lumo, not alive and humming as it once had, but rebuilt, polished, mended, dignified. The LED eyes were new. The dented cookie tin torso had been burnished until it remembered sun. On its chest, someone had riveted a small plaque made from a soda, can cut with careful hands. It read, "First light, never out." Eli laughed, a sound full of rain in June. He bowed his head over the robot, as if in prayer, and pressed his thumb to the little plate. "Welcome home," he whispered. They set Lumo on a crate beneath the lanterns, and the town lined up without being told. One by one, people placed small things at its base, a bottle cap, a bolt, a ribbon, a note folded until it could fit in a pocket. Offerings, maybe, or acknowledgments, or both. When Mrs. Reeves stepped forward, she pressed a single peanut butter sandwich, wrapped in reused foil, into Eli's palm. "For tomorrow," she said, smiling through everything that could not possibly be said. The night thinned. People drifted home smelling like cinnamon and river. The lanterns went out, and the moon decided it was enough. Eli stayed until the last bag was tied and the last tool put away. He walked to the water and listened to it, as he always had when answers hid between stones. He took the index card from his pocket, soft now from a year of worry and weather. He turned it over in his fingers. On the side that asked, "What problem am I solving?" he wrote, in a hand steadier than the boy behind the gym, "Loneliness disguised as waste." On the side that asked, "Who gains if I'm wrong?" he wrote, "The ones who would rather sell tomorrow than build it." He slid the card back where it belonged and breathed. The river answered by not needing to. When he turned, he found his mother on the bank in her diner shoes, heels sinking in a soft ground she didn't apologize to. She threaded her arm through his. "Home?" she asked. He nodded. They walked slowly past the crate where Lumo sat keeping watch like a small metal saint, past the banner that read, "We return what we borrow," past Harbor asleep against the bank like a dog that had done a long day's work. At the edge of the lot, under the first streetlight, he stopped and looked back, not to make sure it was real, but to memorize the angle of the light on the water, the way the night held the town together without being asked. Tomorrow would ask for more, shipments, emails, hard choices that bruise for a while. There would be another storm someday. There always is. But the spark had learned how to walk. It had learned how to teach others to carry it, even when hands trembled. And if you had stood there with him, between the river that remembered and the road that promised, you might have heard what he heard, not in words but in the hum of it all, a vow, stubborn and bright. The world had called it garbage. He had called it a beginning. Tonight, in the quiet after the music, it finally answered back. "This is not the end."